Hey, what's up? Andrew Kramer here for VideoCopilot.net, and welcome back to another very exciting tutorial. Today, we're going to be taking a look at recreating the Lionsgate Studio logo. So let's take a look at the finished product. It's actually pretty straightforward, but I wanted to see if I could recreate it inside of After Effects with Element 3D. You know, it may not be exactly like the studio logo, but just don't be too critical because, you know, at least I'm making a tutorial. You know, you don't see Lionsgate making tutorials on how to create their logo. Now, if they do end up making a tutorial, well, maybe I'll go and start a movie studio. So, how do you like that, Lionsgate? You don't like it. So here's the original logo just for reference. Very nice looking logo, and you can just see the detail in the bevel here. All right, so let's go and get started. We're gonna create a new composition, and we'll do HD, and we'll do 10 seconds, hit OK. So first thing we wanna do is create our title. So we'll take the text tool, click in here, and we'll type Lionsgate. I'm using the Avenir font, and you know, you can use any kind of a similar font. Again, I'm not trying to create it exactly, but hey, if it looks close, all the better. This font looks pretty close. If you can't find this font, just try to find one that looks similar. Let's go and create a new solid. And this will be our E3D layer. We'll hit OK. All right, we'll come over here, type in element, and let's apply it to the solid. Then what we can do is go into the custom layer and choose the custom text layer for our Lionsgate logo. So we'll take path 1, set it to the Lionsgate layer. And then we'll hide the Lionsgate layer and jump inside of the scene setup. Inside of Element 3D, by the way, make sure you guys are running the latest version, 1.6.2, fixes bugs and all that good stuff. So we're just gonna click on the extrude object, and that's gonna create our text. Now, the key to this entire thing is creating a really cool and complex bevel. If we look at the example, we can see there's just some really nice detail in the bevel and some nice reflectivity as well. You can just see, you know, the multiple layers, and they did a really nice job. So let's take a look at recreating it. Here I have my bevel object. The way this works is you select the object, and there are some basic extrusion options. One thing I want to do is go to the tessellation and change it from high to ultra. And what that will do is if we look at the wireframe, it'll actually make it smoother and just give it more resolution. So low kind of looks like that, high and ultra. We could do extreme, but that's pretty extreme. Let's go back to the normal view. Now we're going to play around with the bevel settings. So right now, the material settings also double as our bevel settings. Here we can see all the different options like extrude amount. So we can increase or decrease the extrusion. We have an option to expand the edges, things like that. What I want to do is set this up for our bevel. In this case, I want to turn the bevel curve down. So if I turn it down to 0, you can see that it sort of creates a chiseled look. But I want it to be a little bit round, so we'll just give it just a touch, maybe 0.6. Looks pretty good. And I also want to extend it. The bevel depth will actually stretch the bevel part out. There we go. And maybe we'll turn up the bevel size. So this is good for our first layer. And if you right click and drag, you can move the lighting around to kind of see a different look. Now let's go and add another bevel on top. So we'll click on the object, and we'll add a second bevel copy. So we'll go from 1 to 2. Now this copy is hidden behind the other bevel. So what we need to do is increase the extrusion, and then we can see it. And we can also change the color of it. So if we scroll down, maybe we'll change the color to sort of a dark blue. Scroll back up here. So we have our bevel settings here, and then the material settings below. What I'll do is I'll bring the expand edges in. Maybe bring the bevel size down as well, just nice and tight. If you hold down Shift and mouse wheel in, you can go a little bit slower. It helps a little bit. Also, you can reset the view if you get a little disoriented. So we'll bring the extrusion just in a touch. And then expand the edges. We're just trying to create a little fill-in. And this is obviously useful for other things as well if you want to, have a different color for the face of your text than the sides. So that looks pretty good. Let's start playing around with some basic material. We'll come in here. We actually have a blue paint material. We could drop that on there, and that just has a little bit of reflectivity. And we also have a chrome material that we can put on the bevel. Now, another important thing about reflectivity is the environment map. So if we click on the environment map, we can actually change this to, say, the shop. And this will just give it some smaller details in the reflection. So what we'll do is we'll bring the saturation down so it's just black and white, and maybe turn the gamma down just a touch. And then if we turn up the UV repeat to 3, we can actually start to create some even smaller reflective bits. This is just a nice touch for getting, the O to have some of these more thinner kind of reflective lines that just give it a nice bit of detail. That's looking pretty good. And now what I want to do is add another bevel copy. So we'll go back to the object, and we can add them all at once, or we can add them one at a time. So we'll go to bevel 3, and for this copy, we'll expand the edges. So open that up a bit, maybe bring the extrusion down. Basically, for this copy, I want to have just a little bit of a bevel next to the larger bevel. So let's see here. All right, that looks pretty good. We'll go ahead and put that chrome material on there as well. Next, what I want to do is create the secondary bevel look. So actually, let's bring the expansion in on this one just a touch. That looks good. And we'll go back to the extrusion object and add another one. We'll click 4. Now, for this one, we're going to do something a little bit different. So let's expand the edges. And we'll bring the extrusion in a bit. But I also want to turn on the bevel backside. And so what this will do is if I turn up the size of the bevel, you can see the back of it is straight and the front of it is beveled. So if we turn on bevel backside, it'll create a bevel on both sides. Now let's bring the extrusion in, bring the size down a little bit. Let's see. All right, that looks pretty good. Now I want to add another material. So we'll take this chrome material, apply it there. And I actually want this one to be more like the blue paint. So let's put the blue paint one and maybe just go to the settings, desaturate it a little bit, make it a touch lighter, and turn up the reflection amount. So we'll just crank this up a touch and then lower the Fresnel value just a touch. There we go. Now I want to duplicate that bevel. So what I can do is add my 5th copy, then select the first bevel here, go to the top settings, right click on the bevel property and click copy, and then click on the bevel property and choose paste. And then we'll copy all of the bevel settings at once. Then we can take the Z offset, slide it forward, pull it back just a little bit, and we create something like that. Now we didn't copy the material settings, so let's go back to the scene and we'll take that material and apply it. So that way we're using the same instance. So if I were to say rename this, it'll use the same instance, and then if I change the color, it'll change it for both of those materials. Let me put a little bit of a space between these. So what I'll do is take the first bevel and bring the extrude in just a touch. And then take the second one and bring the Z offset back a touch. There we go. Now on the original one, I think there's 3 different bevels on the side, but I think 2 looks pretty good, and we get the idea. All right, so this is looking good. Maybe we can add a little more reflectivity to our blue paint material on the front face. And let's hit OK. So there is our Lionsgate logo. This is looking pretty good. Let's go ahead and create a new camera. And 28mm, hit OK. And we can kind of see the reflection is looking pretty good, but we might want to tweak that. So if we go click on the object, go down to the render settings, and under environment, we can actually rotate the environment. So we can create a nice gleam, a nice reflection gleam. What I want to do is just move it around until we can kind of see some nice gleaming on the side without illuminating other areas too much. So maybe something like that. It looks pretty good. And kind of go in close, take a look. So that's nice. And another thing we can do without adjusting the materials, we can go into the output. So we'll close the renders, go into the output. Under multi-pass mixer, we can increase the reflection amount. So that's just going to kind of make it a little bit brighter if we want it to be a little bit more intense without having to go in and adjust all of the materials. All right, so let's go and add a little bit of lighting. So we'll go new light, and let's add a point light, maybe 100%, and let's see, maybe we'll push it behind. There we go. And we just want to kind of create a little bit of a highlight. And maybe we'll duplicate it, Control D, and make another one. And that looks pretty good. Now I'm going to go ahead and duplicate another light, Control D, and I'll hit P, and I want to bring the position out front. So if we go into a negative value, the light will actually come closer to the camera. So here we go. Now this looks pretty good, but I actually don't want there to be a specular highlight on the front blue face. So if we go back into Element, click on the scene setup, and if we click on this blue material, we can come down to the specular amount, and let's just set that to 0. What I like is the front edge of the first bevel to have a little bit of a highlight. See that right behind the text? So if I take the paint, go up to the bevel options and bring the expansion in a bit, I can actually create a wider edge. So not that wide, but let's see. I think that looks pretty good. And then we'll hit OK. Now we can see that that light has created this kind of inner white edge around the text. So if I take this light, maybe move it a little further, it just helps kind of make that pop out a little bit more. Another thing I want to do is add some ambient occlusion inside of Element. Let's go to the render settings and turn on ambient occlusion. So we'll click that on. Come over here. Now this is going to create a little bit of shading in between the areas. So we can see as we turn this up, we're going to want to play with the radius and the intensity. Looks pretty good. Just gives it a little bit of depth. You can kind of see there. And we can even go to the output and look at just the ambient occlusion. That's kind of what it's doing, just adding a little bit of shading. We could probably clean up the edges a little bit as well. If we go into the ambient occlusion, like the adaptive blur settings, if you have a supported graphics card, you can turn on the multi-sampling, which will help smooth things out even more. Otherwise, you can just play with the adaptive blur settings to kind of tweak that and maybe turn up the sample. So maybe like 64. So that's going to slow things down a bit, but it'll look a little bit better. I'm just going to go ahead and revert that for now, just to kind of keep things moving fast. So here we go. We'll switch the output back to the composite and we'll move along. Now, while we're on the subject of kind of quality and edges, another thing you may want to do is under the sampling and the output, there's an option for super sampling. If you set that to 2, it'll help smooth out edges. So watch this. Kind of sharp, a little speckly, turn that to 2, and that's going to smooth it out quite a bit. You turn it to 4, it might help out even more. So just be aware of some of these settings. It will slow things down a little bit, but it's going to make it look a lot better. So we can kind of see here. It's a little bit smoother. Now, of course, we have the render mode. We could switch it to preview, which will use kind of lower quality settings while you work and just kind of help speed up, things until you're ready to render. So we'll just keep it at full quality since we're just dealing with a single layer here. All right, so we've got our lighting, we've got our layer. Let's go and add some clouds in the background. We'll come over here. I've actually got a composition of some different cloud stock footage that we shot. It's HD. I'll make sure it's part of the project file, and it's terribly comped together, but you know, what are you gonna do? We're gonna throw it in the background here, and the key here is just to color correct it to death. So that's what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a new adjustment layer. We'll choose Effect Tint and Effect Curves. This is my go-to combination. Let's bring the saturation down just a touch, and then we'll go to the curves and go to the red channel and bring this down, and go to the blue channel, and we'll just kind of crank that up a bit. All right, now I think the front faces of this text looks a little bright. What we could do is go into the scene setup and maybe just darken the blue color a touch. So that looks a little bit better. And of course, we can go into the output, crank up that reflectivity a little bit more, make it pop, you know, nice and crisp as always. And if there's any particular area we need to add more light to, we can just add some more of these point lights. And depending on where you move them, you can kind of help highlight different areas. This is looking pretty good. Now, I want to go ahead and darken our text. So we'll add another curves adjustment, and we'll just kind of darken it down a bit. And now I want to add the lens flare that's in the middle of the background. We're going to create a new solid, and we'll call this optical flares and hit OK. And we'll come over here and we'll type in optical flares. So this is another one of our plugins for creating realistic photographic lens flares. And we'll set the transfer mode to screen, and let's put this layer right above the clouds. And we'll move this right into the background here. There we go. So we could use this, you know, preset, or we go to the options and try to find one that looks a little bit more similar. So let's go to the options. Let's go down to the natural flares, and I think there's one, let's see. Missile strike. Everything's got missiles in it these days. And what I want to do is let's just disable a few of these elements. So we'll hide this and hide that. This is a terrible preset. No, when you need it, you have it. There we go. Just kind of a cool sparkle lens flare. Also, I want to set the aspect ratio to 2, and that'll stretch it out a little bit and hit OK. So let's tint this more of a blue color here. Our clouds look a little bit blown out. Let's see. Maybe we'll take that layer, also add a curves adjustment so we can darken it a bit. And then for our lens flare, let's scale it down. And then I want to add a little bit of a softer glow. So let's take the lens flare, duplicate it, Control D, and then add a fast blur. And that way we have something like that. And then we'll take this bottom one and maybe scale it down just a touch. Actually, let's see. Yeah, we'll scale this down, and then we'll take the top one and bring the brightness down. Maybe we'll add a curves adjustment to this one too. Everybody gets a curves adjustment. Why not? Brighten that up. We want to have a nice hot spot there. And then we can take this copy, so the one that's a little more sparkly, and we'll hit Control D, and let's put that above our Element 3D layer. So let's make this yellow. And we got our lens flare on top, and we'll scale it down quite a bit here. But we want it to kind of be on top just a little bit, you know, maybe bring the brightness down a touch. There we go. That looks nice. Might even take the soft copy as well that's blurred out, duplicate that, put that on top as well, and maybe bring the brightness way down. Maybe turn that blur amount up. And this is just going to create a nice glow. This is looking good. Now our reflection around our edges, it just seems a bit dark. So let's go back into our instance of element, click on the environment map, and let's bring the gamma, open that up a bit. Since that's basically what it's reflecting. So that's going to make it a little brighter. Maybe we'll crank up the reflection intensity a bit more. Check our color correction here. Okay, not too bad. Again, we could play around with the environment as well. So as you change that, it's going to change kind of the look of the edges and the way the reflection looks. So trying to find a nice combination. We might even animate this value as the title comes on, just to kind of give it a nice gleam of sorts. That is the basic idea. Let's see here. So we can refine this, maybe check the color correction on the background flare here. And again, we have our top color correction. Let's go to the RGB and add a little more contrast to our design here. That looks good. All right, I think we're getting somewhere. Maybe our ambient occlusion could be lightened up a touch as well. There we go. It's nice because you can just kind of work non-destructively, go in there, tweak the settings, and just get it to look right. It's looking pretty good. Now, for the camera movement, we'll take the camera, hit P, hold down Shift, hit A, and we'll set a keyframe for the position and point of interest. And then we'll move this over a few seconds, maybe 4 seconds or so. And then we'll zoom in. So if we right click with the unified tool, that will dolly in, or you could just use the track Z tool. But we're gonna push in and we're gonna push in, and we wanna just push it over to the side. So we're gonna cheat the position a little bit as they actually do in the original. So they just kind of cheat it over a bit. And we'll hit F9 here, smooth out the keyframes a touch. And as it resolves, let's fade out our cloud montage. So first, let's put a black solid layer into the background. We'll hit that return, type in background. And we'll fade out our cloud layer. And simultaneously, we should probably fade out some of the lens flare layers. So let's see. Take the opacity. We could take the brightness as well. Fade that out. And take this guy and, turn the brightness down. To 0. We can also add a little bit of animation. So if you play around with the evolution of the lens flare, you can kind of get it to sparkle with maybe just like a touch of rotation. You can keyframe those as well. So I won't do that just because there's a lot of button pushing going on right now, but little things like that are going to make a big difference, and especially animating like the reflection, rotation. So for example, we tweak that while this title's fading out. That's a nice touch there. And then of course we have the lens flares on top here that we can keyframe their brightness out as well. All right, not too bad. Now there's one other small trick that I think is pretty cool because they did it very subtly, and that is kind of like some light rays. What I like to do for light rays when I'm not using third-party plugins is create an adjustment layer, add a levels adjustment, and create sort of a mask of the highlight area. So it's going to be something like that. And then we'll take the radial blur, the fast radial blur, and we'll set it to standard, and we'll turn up the value like that. And so that kind of creates some nice rays. But if we set the transfer mode to screen, we can actually get those rays to sort of blend on top. So we can kind of add a little bit of contrast to make it pop a bit more. It's kind of hard to see, but basically we're creating these rays. Trying to see if we can get it to be a little easier to see, so you get the idea. Pretty cool tip, because you've created the light rays with a single layer without having to, pre-compose a mat or do any, nonsense. So what I would do is just maybe keyframe this layer on, just kind of have it fade up a touch, and then fade out. It's nice. Now, I'm sure the people who worked on this spent a little bit more time. Obviously they did, because they did a great job, unlike what we've done here, which is terrible. So I'm sorry for defacing your guys' great logo, and I feel terrible. I feel absolutely terrible. I mean, no, I don't feel great. All right, let's see here. If we're gonna make it look bad, we might as well use our logo. Nice. No, it looks good. It's good. All right, well, this is the idea. Another cool thing is if you open up the text layer, you can actually type whatever you want. And let's see, maybe give it some spacing. And it will actually update in your logo. The cool thing about Element 3D is that you can do a lot of things sort of non-destructively, and then later update it with different titles, and you don't have to redo all of the work that went into it. So we can take a look here. All right, so not too shabby. Now I know what you're thinking. This thing needs some more, needs more lens flares or light or something, right? All right, thank you guys for watching. We will see you next time.